If that hasn't gotten people to wake up yet, what will? Wake up and realize these people don't care about you. The Libertarian Party is the only party that actually cares about your rights to liberty and freedom. What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Liberty Inc. podcast, your weekly source for all things liberty in North Carolina. I'm your host, Mike Bross, and with me today is Shannon Bray. He is a candidate for U.S. Senate in 2022, representing the Libertarian Party right here in North Carolina. Shannon, welcome to the show.
Wow, thanks for having me. I'm tickled that I get to help kick off your podcast series.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate it. You know, it kind of all started not too long ago, and you know, just kind of recorded our first episode with Joe Garcia, chair of the LPNC, and here I've already got for episode 2 a Senate candidate. So I mean, I'm excited for where the podcast is going, and hope that we can maybe continue to secure great guests like you. So thanks so much for coming on. I'm excited to, you know, just being pretty new to being a libertarian activist. I've always kind of been a libertarian, but you've been in the game for a while, and you know, now kind of going for, you know, the highest representation of the people. I'd like to just, you know, give you a few minutes, kind of tell me about yourself, tell me what brought you into libertarianism, kind of your history and why you want to run for Senate, right?
Excellent. Yeah. So I kind of forget what year it was when I decided to expand into the Libertarian Party. I was previously a Republican, born and raised Republican, from the deep swamps of South Louisiana. You know, everybody's a Republican there. But you know, as I was watching, and I'm a huge John McCain fan, or was for most of my life as an adult, being a Navy veteran, and
sure,
you know, a lot of the things that he did, you know, for our country. But then when you start looking at, you know, the political aspects of some of these major players and the introduction of Sarah Palin into the mix, who I just could not wrap my head around. So then I was at work at the time. I think I was in Colorado, working for a major credit card company. And you know, I get online and I try to find out where I really am politically.
Sure.
And I found that little political test.
The political compass?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then,
who hasn't done one of those, right? Especially lately.
So I get on there and I'm like, you know, am I Republican or am I a Democrat? Because I always felt like I didn't fit really either mold very well. But you know, with just some of the way I grew up, you know, Republican was how I grew up.
Sure.
So when it told me that I was a libertarian, I was like, what is that? So then I started like researching the libertarian stuff.
Nowadays, doesn't that mean you're a terrorist? Isn't that what the federal government's saying about us now?
Well, and even back then, you know, when I looked up libertarians and some of the more well-known and individuals who I've grown to adore, you know, they're very outspoken. They're shocking with some of the things that they say, and you just kind of have to know where they came from to how they got there and the things that really piss them off to understand it. But as somebody not in that circle, coming in and hearing, you know, taxation is theft, and you know, John McCain's a warmonger, or you just start hearing these things and you're like, what? How can they say that? What does that really mean?
Yes.
How is taxation theft? And then, like, I mean, when you hear Shane Hazel or you know, some of the other people that are very well spoken, and it's like, let me tell you why it's theft. You know, because if you don't pay your taxes, they're coming to your door with guns in your faces, and you're like, yeah, that's exactly what's going to happen. You know, if that's how they got Al Capone, right? Some tax law somewhere.
Sure.
So when you start looking at, you know, how the U.S. is constantly in wars and how we got there, and when is peace ever going to be a chance? You know, when you start looking at all of that, I was like, I'm not in the right party. So then I was going, well, let me start following the Libertarian Party a little bit. And you know, I gotta be honest. Then we had Gary Johnson.
Sure.
in the mix, who I think is fantastic as a person, but then he really got beat up, not knowing some world events and things like that. And it was a hard transition, really to kind of come out and say, I have problems with all the candidates, who do you vote for? So then I just kind of spent the next couple years on my own, trying to understand what I really believed in. And if it was up to me, what would I do?
You're jumping ahead for one of my predetermined questions. I got one of those coming for you, but.
So then it's like, well, what would I do? And I'm like, well, I don't have to worry about that because I'll never be in politics. Right. Back then I was a code slinger. I was writing code pretty much 80 hours a week, and never had a desire to do anything political up until just, recently with the Trump administration. I was at that time, then I started working for the DOD. I was a cybersecurity analyst, and I kept getting furloughed. He kept shutting down the government. I kept not getting paid. And just so happens right for that big long one. And I was out of work for 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
We had a congressman on the East Coast that had passed away, Walter Jones.
Okay.
So then I was like, well, I've got nothing better to do. I'm going to run for that office. So then I get online, figure out how to run for office. And it was really that process of really starting to hear the issues from people, not just my issues, because I was going in as on my issues.
Sure.
And that's something that I'm still going to do this time, is what my issues are, because all of a sudden now the world is catching up to what my issues are,
right,
which is cybersecurity and all of that. So I was probably a little early. But, I get out there and I start talking about a cybersecurity platform and how I think that the wall's probably going to go unfinished and be a waste of money. And it's going to probably increase the problem instead of fix it. And that money was much better going to fix the bases here in North Carolina, and it hurt us job-wise. But nobody really cared about all of that then. Right. It was more about, are you going to do what Trump wants to do? And I'm like, no, it's not good for North Carolina. Oh, well, then if you're anti-Trump, then I don't want anything to do with you. That's fine. But I don't care who the president is. If whatever their agenda isn't good for North Carolina, I will not stand with them. I don't care what part of the party is, because what people forget is that your representatives from your state are supposed to represent your state, right? The people in your state. And these are issues more like on the legalization of marijuana, right? Because now we're looking at potentially using marijuana as a cash crop for North Carolina, sure, benefiting the state, yeah, right? Or, what things don't benefit the state? Sending all of the base money that could build jobs out to a border wall that never got finished. Not good for the state. So that's
most things the federal government spends money on are not good for the state.
And see, that's what makes this platform beautiful, right? Is because I don't really care what your morals or your ethics are. As long as you're not impeding on other law-abiding citizens, then you shouldn't necessarily get to dictate what they do. And each platform that you look at, whether it's the Democrat platform or the Republican platform, they start out somewhere, and then there's a point to where they have to go into hypocrisy, right? It doesn't matter; it has to happen. Yeah. And the one example of that is let's go off with the abortion one, right? So the Republicans, many of them single issue voters, right? If you are in favor of abortion, killing babies, they like to say late term, right when they're getting ready to be born, you're going to rip them out and send them to hell, right? When you take that argument, which you'll never be able to convince people on either side of that to change that. That's how they're wired on that subject. But then you start trying to apply that. Well, do you care about all unborn children? I mean, even the ones that are trying to cross into the United States? Oh, no, they're illegal. Right. So it's not on a moral issue. Right. You're not telling me that God's children are only born in the United States. So you get to a point to where you have a line of hypocrisy, and it's quite clear, right?
I mean, the hypocrisy from both the left and the right, as anybody who's been a libertarian for any amount of time, like that's one of the easiest things to do, right? Is to look over and find, like there, where on the right, where, abortion is awful because, you're killing children, yet you were cheering the past several warmongering Republican presidents who have been dropping bombs funded by you on Middle Eastern countries for decades. And nobody wants to talk about that. And that's one of those issues that is, super polarizing. Everyone's fixed on it. But when you apply whatever logic they're using, you see the same thing with Democrats, right? That's a big one. You take two of their positions where you've kind of got the the narrative of marginalized communities are being systemically attacked by the police. If you believe that to be true, why would you want to disarm those people if they have to fear for their life and they're leaving their house every day with someone trying to kill them? You should be advocating to give every poor minority person a gun so that they can defend themselves, so that these bad, evil people who are going to kill them don't have a power differential. And you see that consistently throughout almost every issue. There's hypocrisy between Democrats and Republicans, but that's one thing I respect about the Libertarian Party is I may not agree 100% with every issue on the platform, but it's consistent and I understand why it is. And if I look at the totality of the platform versus the totality of any other platform, it's the one that I get behind and say, you know what, I agree with so much more and disagree with so few of this versus either of these other platforms, right? So, yeah, that's... You're making me happy hearing this, and I can't wait to vote for you. But I'm a libertarian, so I'm the easy vote there, and that's kind of one of the things that I think is great too there, Shannon, where you point out kind of the hypocrisy there, and when I think about that, I'd like maybe it's a silly exercise, right? Most of our audience is probably going to already be libertarian, but the reality is if they share it on their feed and someone else who's a Democrat or Republican. I would love to hear, libertarians would be excited about you. I'd love to hear your pitch to Republicans and then your pitch to Democrats on, maybe you're a Republican, you don't like Trump, the direction that's going. Why should Republicans vote for you and try to usher in, libertarians, getting elected? Because I truly think we could save the world. Take it over, leave people alone, and make things a lot better. So what would your pitch be to Republicans, and then what would your pitch be to Democrats?
Well, the nice thing about Republicans is they think that they're conservative. So if I start with no, I'm actually conservative, I am not going to support anything that's going to raise our taxes. In fact, my job is to lower them. But here in North Carolina, and I'll tell you why I know this here in a second. Yeah. The guns are a big deal, huge deal. And the reason why I know that is during the 2020 election, the Democrats bought a bunch of flyers, sent them all over the state, North Carolina. Okay. $250,000 they spent on two flyers. One of these flyers, and it was accurate, right? They were talking about how Tom Tillis sided with Donald Trump on red flag laws. And so they had essentially passed more gun laws than Obama did. Yeah. When people realized that, and it was for voting had already started. So I'm getting all of these phone calls because they put my cell phone number on these flyers. So my phone's blowing up. Some people are happy. Some people are mad.
Wait,
but
the Democrats put your number on?
Yep.
Can they do that, Lee? I mean, I guess
we
it's
don't know
public
actually because on the bottom of each flyer, it's supposed to say this has been sponsored or paid for by so-and-so, and there's no name. But because it's from a Democrat source, because they're trying to split the gun vote between the Republicans and the Libertarians. So they do that to give Cal Cunningham the advantage there. But Cal had already spun himself into a hole with his infidelity issues.
Yeah.
Right. Trying to be the good old boy who's always going to be honest. And then, not only was he honest to his wife, but then he got girlfriend one and girlfriend two. And, that just kind of spirals out. So, there. And then after that, I get a ton of hate mail, like, because I've enabled Trump's agenda and all. And if people just knew me, I can care less who the president is, as long as they're doing their job, right? Are they a metric of liberty, or are they bombing kids, right? Are they raising my taxes? Are they trying to take away my constitutional rights? Whether it's the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. The third doesn't get much play, but you never know. Maybe we have federal police coming in from Portland, and then they start sleeping in your houses. But then you got fourth, fifth, sixth, all of these amendments are extremely important.
Yeah.
But every administration, they start taking away something from all of them to where, a lot of people say it's a failed experiment. I don't. I personally think it's a blueprint of what we should get back to. But what we've allowed is lawmakers to come in and make little bitty changes over the course of time, much like evolution, and then all of a sudden you get this pink elephant at the end of it, and it wasn't anywhere close to what it was supposed to be.
Evolution does a much better job than government, though, with their incremental changes. Evolution tends to make things better. It seems like everything the government does seems to just give them a little bit more power and us a little less freedom. Every
law takes away our personal freedom.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's one of the things that, with all of the problems that were going on, it's, I have a cybersecurity background, and, I'm currently working on a PhD. And one of the areas I'm studying is election security, trying to use blockchain technology as a way, to offer, a secure exchange of information between, the voters and the people who they represent or whatnot. And that can clearly be done. Right.
Yeah. I've seen proof, I've seen patents on that with how they, and I'm sure there's multiple ones now at this point with the proliferation of blockchain and all the cryptos. I think that would be, you've kind of got the crazy theories that everyone has, but I think if nothing else, everyone probably has to say, maybe our election system should be looked at. And I think that's one of the things. If you could implement blockchain voting where every single person had a way to cast their vote, feel confident that vote was counted correctly, and have the trust that blockchain would allow, I think that would be game changing in and of itself, as well as pull out all, so many holes in the armor of what's up there, because you're in cybersecurity. I take cybersecurity pretty seriously because I run my business out of my house. But I can tell you, like, that's really important. If you have one tiny, it doesn't matter where that hole is. You leave one password that's too easy to guess to an email address, and now all of a sudden they've got access to, I see it all the time. I'm in financial services, and it's big attacking our industry, and you see how big it affects the private sector. It makes you wonder, like, are they just ignoring the public sector, or there's hackers trying to get into everything else, but are they not trying to get into this, or do we believe that these antiquated systems that are all different across the country, that they're somehow safe? And I'm not, hey, at the end of the day, I want libertarians to win. I really don't care about anything else. But if you look at our system and think, yeah, our voting system is secure, I kind of feel like you just haven't really put much thought into it. Not saying anything has happened, but to say that nothing could happen and that we're doing wonderful on cybersecurity is kind of a joke, because I can tell you that people who are trying, large corporations that are trying to protect their data that in theory should be similarly important, I promise you they probably spend a heck of a lot more money and have a lot more safeguards on employees and everything else than, I don't know the federal government. You know better than me, but I could tell you, like county and local governments, I cannot imagine that if someone was motivated, that we could say that our government's election systems are safe. Maybe they're gonna get me banned from YouTube just for saying that, but I think that's a factual statement. We're on a kind of a YouTube no topic here with those things. You can't talk about things like that. But from a cybersecurity standpoint, what do you think? Aside from blockchain voting, is there a particular because I've seen a couple of patents for those. I mean, is there one that you kind of lean for? Is there something that you think we could actually see coming?
Well, not as far as I do have a couple of my favorite blockchain technologies.
Okay.
But not necessarily that particular system wouldn't necessarily have to exist on one of them. There are at least two that I would like them, like Ethernet or the internet computer one, because that's where I see the future of the internet actually going. All the other ones there, they may be great tokens or whatever. It's hard to know whether something is either considered a token versus a currency, how the IRS is going to taxate that. And, so it's going to be a mess. But that's cryptocurrency is a whole other conversation.
That's a whole other topic, which with what I do, I probably have to be careful talking about that, but publicly. But yeah, I mean, so from that standpoint, one of the things that, and this was the one where you kind of mentioned it earlier, and I said I'd have one for you later, where if you could, let's kind of fast forward. 2022 happens. You are now a U.S. Senator for the state of North Carolina. And then we'll just, despite you being a libertarian and, this not really being the way it works unless we have a massive libertarian Senate over, let's somehow come out and actually, you're running for the Senate. This would only even work in the House. But let's just assume for some reason you're at the top. Someone says, you're dictator for a day almost, okay? What would be kind of one thing that you would like to see the federal government do? Either get rid of one law or implement one change to enforcement. If you kind of have just one political wish list item that you could snap your fingers and have it be done, what would that issue be?
The war on drugs.
I mean, that's the no-brainer, because if you end that one, it touches so many other issues. I mean, it touches the border, it touches police brutality, it touches so many different things, and that makes me happy to hear that. So the sad thing, and maybe I'm a pessimist. It's weird because I'm an optimist in that I think the ideas of libertarianism, right? I love the fact that you're running there, and we're kind of a purple state, which makes it harder for someone who may, who's maybe like on the right, but likes what you're saying, or someone who's on the left, but likes what you're saying. It makes it a little bit harder to pull the trigger in purple states, right? Because you kind of have that thing of, I really like this guy, but I really don't want that person to be there. But I truly think that, the way the Libertarian Party gets forward 20, 30, 40 years from now is kind of starting at that local level and kind of normalizing the ideas of liberty, where small towns, counties, things like that, where all of a sudden, hey, you've got libertarian leadership here, and we can tune out CNN calling libertarians domestic terrorists, and we can say, hey, no, I know the mayor, he's a libertarian, he's a great guy. In fact, he's kind of lowered our property taxes that we're paying here. I think that's kind of the solution. Is we kind of have at the national level, and they said I could veer to national for about 40% of the time. So, just touching on kind of the long term that I'd like to see is you win all these local elections, and then you get to that point where you hit the 5%, right? And that's I feel like if they would have let Joe and Spike on the debate stage, the Libertarian Party would have, as far as a presidential count, been the most successful Libertarian Party showing ever. Because the reality is, I don't know of, there's a lot of people who hate Joe Biden and a lot of people who hate Donald Trump and a lot of people who hate both of them, right? And if they would have had an opportunity to see someone bringing the ideas of liberty, I think that could have been a game changer. But I think that's got to be kind of a short-term litmus test. And I, in my opinion, the way we do it is at the local level, right? Is people see at a small level, hey, libertarianism is not crazy. It's working here. As you expand across the country, maybe get 100 mayors, a bunch of town councils, things like that. You kind of normalize it. I think back to kind of early politics. Ross Perot almost broke the system, right? Before he dropped out and then came back in. Like, I still feel if he didn't drop out, the uniparty's grasp on struggle. So that's what I call them. At the end of the day, they only care about keeping themselves in power. Like, Republicans would probably just let Democrats run things than let libertarians get enough power that we're a threat every election. And I think the Democrats would do, let whoever in there under the Republicans, as long as we don't have to contend with libertarians as well for the next 20 years. That's what I'd like to see is once we hit that 5%, is how do we kind of replicate that energy? Because I think, there's money, there's things there. Those are the things that are hard to do, right? You have to have a lot of people to get that kind of money. But I still think like 20 years from now, I think we can have real libertarian representation at the top, enough to make a difference, right? Like enough to actually make a difference and take a stand where, you've got these pet projects from both Democrats and Republicans that a libertarian would look at it, and the Democrats paint the Republicans this way and the Republicans paint the Democrats this way. But at the end of the day, both of them are very regularly authorizing more power to the state. And if we had enough libertarians there, and sometimes they go along with each other where it's like, hey, we'll give you this authoritarian power. If you give us this authoritarian power, we'll wrap it in and hide it in page 6,000 of the bill and pass it. Where if we had enough, libertarians at the national level, we could put a stop to that, right? Like either that or just make it completely obvious where, all right, it's just the libertarians standing against this. The uniparty's kind of unifying because they both have so much of their own authoritarian garbage in here. So I mean, that I agree. I think especially for the Republicans who were not Trump fans, I think that's really, I think you've got a solid pitch, and I believe you. At the end of the day, you will fight for lower taxes for North Carolinians in the Senate. With your background, and that's the thing I love about the Libertarian Party. I didn't give you any of my background. I actually started very far left. Okay, I'm 38 years old. My first ever presidential vote was for Al Gore, and at the time I lived in Florida. So you can imagine what an 18-year-old liberal kid who just passed, just made his first vote, super important. And then, of course, the Bush-Gore fiasco goes through. And then, I got into finance, and that was my big problem. And is I like the ideas that the Democrats campaign on of equality. I've got friends of all colors, all orientations, and I love them. And if you're a good person, that's all I care about, right? Nothing else matters if you're a good person. And that kind of gave me a challenge because I'm a financial advisor by trade. I study economics. And I look at the policies of mainstream Democrats, and I'm just like, whoa. Like, I like all this, but all of this is bullshit. And it doesn't really work in the real world, and it's gonna cause problems. And I've been saying that for 20 years. My whole adult life is this doesn't work. This is scary. And now you have Republicans doing the same thing. $29 trillion in debt. I worry. What's the future for my son? Right? Like what is it? I could work my ass off the rest of my career, and if the government keeps being irresponsible, I save $1 million. Great, that's your week's groceries. It's not that far-fetched of an idea, especially if you look at when governments have printed money like this in the past. Germany after World War I. I mean, they had trillion-dollar banknotes that citizens were walking around and using to buy. It's mind-blowing, and people don't think it can happen. But I think that's where libertarianism can help things. But what would be your kind of pitch to the Democrats, right? So you've got some Democrats there that are kind of looking at things and might have kind of came from that same background of liking the messaging there, but the practical thing. I think for me, that's where I find the most ground is a regular person talking to people on the left. But if you got some disaffected Democrats, why should they vote for you for senator in 2022?
Well, the nice thing about I actually relate a lot to the Democratic Party, primarily because of the inclusion aspects.
Yeah,
we have social and economic liberty should be available to all. Everyone should have at least the same opportunities to follow their dreams, right? There are so many laws that are currently on the books that target, minorities or people of, lesser economic status and whatnot. And that's kind of really where the war on drugs comes in, because you don't necessarily see how that affects communities until you really look at the damages done. But even gun laws, they started out being racially biased.
Yeah.
Voting issues were racially biased, right? Because after slavery ended, there was a slew of black senators that were actually voted in from the South.
Yeah.
And then that's when a lot of the whites were going, oh my goodness, we can't be giving up our power. So now we have to start coming up with all of these laws. So we want to disarm. We want to make sure that people are having issues on voting. And this is kind of where all of that originates. So on the Democratic side, I want to make that all better by getting rid of the exclusive laws and changing those to be inclusive, right? To actually be, every U.S. citizen has the right to vote in a federal election that is above the age of whatever and it clearly states that, because that's not stated in the Constitution. I do believe it was added much later, just only a few years ago, though, talking about voting rights. But so that's where I start there. Now, a lot of that's going to come in with my immigration stance is much, much weaker. And then on the Democratic side, they're like, yay. And then Republicans are like, oh, no, you can't do that. But it comes in two parts, right? Because I understand why that can't happen tomorrow, because of the economic impact of having a welfare system take care of everyone who comes in. So it's a two-part system, right? You have to do something. You have to get rid of the welfare system the way it is in order to really attack the immigration problem, because immigration isn't a problem if people don't feel like they're all of a sudden paying for everything, right? So that's kind of there's enough on the Libertarian Party really to really bring people in no matter where they are. I mean, if with all the different sexual orientations, the most inclusive party that I've ever seen is the Libertarian Party, because all men are created equal. We don't want any laws that are imposing someone else's ideas of morals onto anyone. So we have probably the check there. People really start looking at our platform. Yeah. But then with the minorities, the problem is a lot of minorities think that the Democratic Party is their only protection, when in essence, it's one of the things that are actually hurting them. So then you have to, but that's a much tougher conversation, because then you have to start bringing in the economic impacts. That's not as clear to see, right? You have to kind of show how that is affecting people generation after generation. Yeah. So there's that. Now, the one thing that I try not to do is really kind of insult anyone's captain from one of the other teams, right? I don't typically trash Trump as a person. I'll go after him after his policies. Me trashing him as a person isn't going to change status anywhere, because everyone's already done that. But with Biden, there's plenty of things that I don't like about him too, but there's also some benefits, right? He's supposed to have done, and I was kind of waiting for day one for the whole war on drugs thing to just evaporate and go away, right? Because he was out there talking about how, we need to have a drug reform and we need to reform a lot of those laws, the criminal justice laws, but I haven't seen any of that. The only thing that I've seen, but maybe it's because I'm in an echo chamber, is the attack on the Second Amendment. So as soon as that started, that quickly after him coming in the office, that's really the only thing I've had time to focus on. But now that California, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, the thing is, and this is where I wonder, because you would think the way Democrats campaign on so many issues, right? Where they're the party that does more about talking about how the war on drugs is so harmful, particularly to poor people, right? If you're driving around in Daddy's $60,000 Mercedes and you get pulled over with cocaine and your family has a good lawyer, chances are it's gonna get expunged. You're still gonna be able to get a job, but if you're taking the bus to work and you get caught with the same thing, you're going to have a shitty public defender, and you're probably going to get way harsher punishment than someone who has the means. But even then, you go through the costly legal system, and that's just the start of it, because then you can't even get it expunged. And now this one little possession charge that someone had, that even if they were really addicted, you can get clean from addiction, and whether it's a secular or a faith-based, there's a lot of charities that will help people get clean. You can, because drugs will destroy your life. And I'm not saying, I know you're talking about legalizing cannabis. Maybe I'm a little more radical. I say legalize all drugs, heroin, everything. I want it all legal. But, people are like, well, heroin's going to kill people. But yes, so is the alternative, right? If you bust this guy for heroin, and he goes to jail and gets clean, in jail, which, we can't even keep drugs out of prisons if we're being completely honest. If he's got enough coming in commissary, I'm sure he can probably get his heroin right there in jail. But let's assume that person gets clean. Now they come out and they go to get a job. They're not going to be able to get a job because they were recreationally using some drug. So now, what kind of cycle does that do? So now, any benefit that could have been done, it's not like you send a drug addict to jail, a couple years later they can come out and their life is fixed. Where if you take a drug addict and don't spend thousands of taxpayer dollars putting them through that process, don't bury them under, a mountain of, payday loans and title loans where now you're just taking poor people and further pressing them down. And you would think that as much as the Democrats talk about wanting to lift that they would do something. Like, that's the clearest, there's what you said is the one thing you could snap. I would agree. That's like my one thing. If there was one thing I could snap my fingers and ask for, it would be end the drug war. Not because I want to do heroin, it's because I don't want my tax dollars doing this, and the outcomes aren't better, right? There's and people make that, the Republicans love to make this case. Well, what if that heroin guy, breaks into somebody's house to steal a TV? Well, we have a law for that. It's that you arrest him for breaking into the house and stealing somebody's TV, not for vegging out on his couch and staring at the ceiling, right? Like, if you're not hurting somebody, why are you spending taxpayer dollars and guarantee, if someone does drugs, their life might be ruined from drugs. But if someone gets the strong arm of the state thrown at them because of drugs, they're probably not ever going to be able to recover from that, even if they get clean, right? Even if they get clean and manage to stay off of it. That's the kind of thing that can permanently impact job opportunities, relationships, so many different things. And that's where, I really butt heads with Republicans on the war on drugs. Because I think, I struggle with it. They used to say libertarians were, we're economically like Republicans, and we're socially like Democrat, and that's totally not true. Like when I've always hated that. Economically we're libertarian, socially we're libertarian. That's like the best thing, but nobody really knows what that means. But that's something there. So I have a question for you, and this is theoretical, right? But you being a Senate candidate wanting to kind of join that. How far away from ending the war on drugs do you think we are? Like, what would it take to get legislation to put an end to this? Maybe I'm a pessimist because I think big pharma and the cartels who buy their politicians, I don't think they'll ever let it happen. But you're obviously a lot closer to that. Is that something we see soon or never, or what does that look like?
No, I would imagine that we probably will maybe in this next administration see the legalization at the federal level of cannabis.
Okay.
I would at least hope so. If not, then the whole point wasn't even worth talking about during when we're trying to get elected. But really the only person who kind of went out on the war on drugs that I really respect him for it was, Andrew Yang. He was pretty much, I'll make heroin legal, but people hear that, they're like, oh my God. But it's so that they can find help, right? And there's a pathway to recovery versus a pathway to prison or death.
Yeah.
And then even with some of those, like the story you went into was excellent. But the one thing that people often forget about too is that same cocaine probably would have been crack at the lower economic level, right? And it carries a much stiffer penalty. So a lot of the cheaper drugs that people sell on the street, they carry the maximum penalties because they're racially encouraged laws, or the laws apply to everyone, but they don't apply equally. That's kind of the things that I kind of wish that the Democrats would look at and be like, how helpful are we really to our base, right? Inclusion, great. Well, your laws also, you can't just be mouthpieces to that. And then the Republicans, they have, some of the things on their platform too, I can really get behind. But then you got all the other stuff, but I hate
the problem is both of them put it in their platform and then they get in office and don't do anything about it.
They don't do it, right? It's all just bullshit, right? Yeah. I mean, you see it on both sides now with, I will do whatever it takes, but we want you to be fair to us. But when it's our turn, we are going to mud stomp you. It's been made clear across the board. One of the things that we have to be on the lookout for now is the Supreme Court's clearly, I think, going to side with the libertarian side of the Second Amendment. But does that stop the current administration from padding the court with Democrats, right? Can they outweigh that and then pretty much just kind of start passing all these laws and have the court kind of just mud stomp us? That right there is a break of separation between how those two powers should work. But that's really my biggest fear at this point. And I don't want Democrats think I'm picking on them, because you better believe if Trump was able to do it, he'd have done it too. And I would have been equally against it there. Growing a court just for advantage on one side or the other is the most unlibertarian thing you can do. So that we're, but
I mean, that's massive centralization of power.
Yeah.
I mean, regardless, and maybe some people are like, yeah, I'm okay with the power grab because it's my guys grabbing the power, but to a libertarian, and that's what people, I think a lot of people who don't understand libertarians is we've got left libertarians and right libertarians, and guess what? Just like you got fighting in the Republican and Democrat parties among we have it too, but generally we all accept kind of some core principles. And the core message that I think I think all libertarians believe, and if everybody would get on board, like at the core, we just believe, look, it's not okay to hurt people or hurt or steal their stuff. Like, and you apply that at the individual level, and like everyone's like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I can't imagine anybody who looks at that and says, I disagree. I think it's perfectly okay to take their stuff. The problem is both Democrats and Republicans may kind of generally try to pitch that idea, but you look at what they're doing, they're okay when the state is hurting people or hurting their stuff. Both Republicans and Democrats are okay in certain situations. Where you look at Republicans on the border wall, they're perfectly fine with eminent domain, stealing land from someone that has been in their family since before America was a country. It's been their land. Oh, we got to have the border wall. We're the government. We're taking this whether you like it or not, right? And then on the other side, where the whole taxation is theft, when Democrats want to tax you for all these things, at the end of the day, as you said, what happens if you don't pay your taxes? Well, someone's going to come and get you. And if you resist, they're going to pull a gun on you. And if you keep resisting, you might die. So you just go with them and let them take your shit and throw you in jail. And that's the thing is, that's why I like the Libertarian Party. Even if I disagree on certain things, we truly believe that people shouldn't hurt each other or take their things, and governments, entities shouldn't hurt you or take your things either. That's one of the things that, I think from a messaging standpoint, I think every libertarian will tell you, we wish the Libertarian Party was better at messaging that core message, because that's something I think will, resonate with anybody who's alive, right? Are you alive? You'll probably agree with this. If you're dead, you might still agree with it, right? That's something I want to see change. Like, I really want to see that change. And I think having someone win, and that's why I wanted to have you on early, right? We're in a state, we're realistic, right? I think we'd have to have a lot happen in the next 2 years for you to win. But I think if we can get on board at local levels now, at getting messaging out there, I would like to see Senate candidates in every state. And I know this is a North Carolina focused podcast, but one thing I did want to ask you, because I truly believe, we're going up against a machine as libertarians, a giant uniparty machine with the RNC and the DNC that have millions and millions and millions of dollars to support all kinds of candidates. They have a candidate in a deep red area. Blue will throw $5 million at it like it's nothing. We don't have that as libertarians. We don't. But I would love to know, what I want to see happening is I want to see activists. I want to see libertarians running for office at all levels locally, not just in North Carolina. I do want to see it in North Carolina, but I want to see it across the country. What I would ask you is, let's say, and I'm not trying to bring in primary competition for you here. I think you've already.
I would always talk the primary.
Always. If there's someone out there, whether in North Carolina or someone else, who's thinking, because some people, local government is where they want to be. But if there's someone there who wants to run for Senate in their state, or says, I like Shannon or I don't like Shannon, I want to run against him, what advice would you give to someone who's kind of got that thought in their head? I know you said you just kind of jumped into it. What advice would you give them as kind of a starting point, or how to do that? And how do we increase libertarians running for office when we're generally distrustful of government as a whole in the first place?
Ideally, if anybody ever reached out to me on Twitter or social media and was just like, hey, how do I do this?
Yeah.
I would, basically unload everything that I know about the process. But I would actually love to have a Senate primary for Libertarian, primarily because during the primary aspect is when people are starting to go after each other or whatnot. That's a lot of TV attention is there, right? In the Libertarian Party, if we're not actively out there and if we're not in the debates or whatever, you don't get any mention. No one even knows you exist until they see your name on the ballot at the very end. So it's difficult from that standpoint.
Right.
But the nice thing is hopefully my only goal this time around is I want to make the Senate debate stage.
Yeah.
Last time it was
what do we need to do to support you in that? You know, I know that 5% nationally and presidential. Granted, they game the system and they just only include polls that are binary choices. I mean, they'll game it there, but what does it take if we as North Carolina libertarians want to help you with that goal of getting you on that Senate debate?
I have to raise $50,000.
$50,000. Okay, and you know, I'm gonna pull something up here for everyone else, because there is a donate button right here on your website. So I'm just gonna pull this up real quick. So if you are watching this right here, you heard it there. We need to get Shannon Bray on the debate stage, because media attention at the end of the day is what's going to help libertarian ideas. You can see they're shutting us down, calling us domestic terrorists and all these things. And I can promise you, you know, Shannon, this is the first time I've spoken with you, but we're having a great conversation. He's clearly not a terrorist, if you ask me. But if you can go to www.shannonbray.us, you will see this screen right here. Click on the donate button. And Shannon, what's our goal? When do we have to raise that $50,000 by?
I think by the end of the primary season.
Okay.
Would be when they really start count. Now it comes down to the month of the debate. They'll go back and see, you know, that's when they go and see, because last year I was invited, or last election I was invited. And then as I was getting excited about it, I was on Facebook, you know, check me out on the debate stage, yada, 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 yada. And then they just invited me. They were like, oh, you didn't make $50,000. And I was like, well, there's only 4 of us in the race. How hard is it, you know, to have a 4-way tie, or not a tie, but, you know, a 4-way debate.
I mean, the Democrats had what, 38 in a primary? I mean, yeah, I think I exaggerated, but
throwing people at you. But, you know, the one thing I don't do is I don't turn down any showings. Like if people are like, hey, we're having a political event, you're invited, and it's in Boone. Well, as long as I can get there, I'm going to be there, right? So the last couple of times I'm driving all over because it's the only FaceTime I really get.
Yeah.
With the exception of, you know, speaking for Spike and Joe and kind of piggybacking on theirs, everything else was me running around, inserting myself into other people's debates, right?
Yeah.
At the beginning, North Carolina thought I was a Democrat just because they were like, well, he wasn't talking very nicely about Trump, so he must be blue. So they invited me a bunch of stuff. I'm sure they fixed that problem this time. So I have to find other ways to to get involved.
Yeah. So Shannon, I mean, I want to thank you, and I want to back that up. You know, you said you'd come on. We just started chatting the other day on Twitter. Again, this podcast just launched, and you surely enough showed up, and I appreciate you. And as we get closer, I would love to have you. You know, granted, who knows what's going to happen at convention? Things could change, and they could be like, Mike, get lost. We're putting somebody else in as the podcast host. But as long as I'm the podcast host here at Liberty Inc., I'd love to have you on when we're kind of leading up there. I appreciate your time. We're getting close to an hour, and I want to respect your night and your family. You got any closing thoughts for us? Any kind of final things that you'd want to say to the libertarians in North Carolina, or the borderline libertarians and future libertarians in North Carolina? Sure.
Really, my biggest thing is this, and there's going to be some people who love me as a candidate, some that hate me as a candidate. But don't necessarily let that get in the way. The most important thing is that you just get out and you vote your principles, right? Not someone else's. And don't ever let anyone tell you that voting third party is a wasted vote. Because as we saw in the last election, I got 4 times the votes that Dr. Joe got in the state. So that was a huge impact. And it was a huge outcome to how that election worked. And it told me that there was a lot more liberty-minded North Carolinians out there than just the R's and the D's, by at least 4 times. People who voted for me, but then picked a different presidential candidate.
Right.
That's huge. So that's showing me the growth of North Carolina really starting to think about, hey, is the Republican or Democrat parties exactly what let me look at these third parties, because you're not wasting your vote. And for the people who say that, I give them this. Well, If you live in Texas and you vote for a Democrat, you're probably wasting your vote, right? Because it's a Republican base. And then in California, if you vote for a Republican, you're probably wasting your vote.
Sure.
Same thing applies. Your guy may not win, probably won't win. But just because you put your vote behind someone who may or may not win doesn't mean you're wasting your vote.
You're voting for what you believe in.
Principles.
Yeah, you're
Exactly.
voting for what you believe in. Yeah.
So that's really about it. But I'm happy to talk about any issues on Twitter. I'll fight the nasty wars. I'll fight the nice ones. All I really want to do is kind of share, my perspective of liberty. And if people like it, that's great. If not, I'll continue slinging code. I mean, I'm good. Yeah. I'm in a cyber safe world that I live in. And I just want other people, to kind of be in the same boat.
Well, Shannon, thank you so much. So gonna wrap it up here, guys. Thank you everybody for watching the podcast. Still lining up the next guest, so can't really plug that one. But again, you can head on over to Shannon's website, shannonbray.us. Again, help us reach that 50,000 so we can get him on the debate stage. Also, check out the Libertarian Party. You can see it below me in the overlay there. On Twitter at LPNC, on Facebook LP of NC or LPNC.org. Thank you so much, and we will see you next week.